global energy shocks and external supply disruptions continue to expose Africa's vulnerabilities, despite the continent's vast energy wealth. But as Africa pushes to strengthen its energy independence, another major question is emerging. How should the continent diversify its energy systems and power its future? I'm Beatrice Marshall from CGTN, and welcome to this special edition of Talk Africa, co-produced with Kenya Television Network.
And I'm Dennis Asseto from KTN. From growing populations and rapid urbanization to rising industrial demand, pressure on Africa's energy systems continue to increase. At the same time, the continent holds some of the world's greatest untapped renewables energy potential, from geothermal and hydro to vast solar and wind resources. So this week on the program, we explore what energy diversification could realistically look like for Africa, and whether the continent can build a more resilient, balanced and sustainable energy system. And now, to help us unpack how Africa can turn energy diversification into a practical reality, we are now joined by our panel. Here with us, Mugwe Manga, Climate Finance Lead, FSD Kenya. Also with us, Ifeanyi Odo, Country President, Schneider Electric East Africa. And joining us from Lagos via Zoom, Jide Pratt, Country Manager, Trade Grid. A warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining this discussion.
Well, JP, let me start off with you, because Africa is richly endowed with renewables, yet millions across the continent still live with unreliable electricity access. What should genuine energy diversification look like for Africa, and what would an ideal balance be? What would an ideal energy mix balance look like?
If we start from the beginning, where you'd find out that Africa as a continent is large. So you'd find out that what is applicable to North Africa might be totally different from South Africa or East or West Africa. So when you talk about an ideal energy mix, I'm not so sure if there's an ideal, but we must move into what we call just energy, in terms of what are the competitive advantages each region has and it can use to scale. In scaling this, you must also look at the fact that it needs to be dispatchable. That's number one. If you moved into energy security, you'd look at things like quadruple A: adaptability, availability, affordability, and accessibility. So for Africa, an ideal mix will come to what each region has. There's gas, there's hydro, there's thermal, and of course there's wind. So it's harnessing what the best advantages is as each region and finding a way to embed that power across regions. I'm not of the view that Africa can find one source to power all our countries. It's not going to be possible, because the demand keeps growing. The scalability becomes a challenge. So you might need to have embedded power projects based on the competitive advantages. To cap it up, I'd say probably solar 40%. I'd say probably hydro another 25%. And then maybe biofuels will come in maybe at the end, and then gas takes another 20%. In my opinion, that might be what would be ideal.
Right. Ifeanyi, I want to get your comment on that, because as we talk now, around 600 million Africans are still without access to electricity. And yet we hear that renewables are the energy of the future. What do you foresee for Africa?
So you're right. And that data point should always remain at the top of our mind. But what we should also keep in mind is that it's not just 600 million of today. There is also a rapid growing population. So if you look at the fact that very young continent, the youngest in the world, rapidly growing population, so the rate of electrification needs to be top of mind. And yes, renewable is one of the key solutions to help bridge this and accelerate it. So with the advancement that has been made around renewables across the world, we need to leverage the potential and leapfrog even faster with technologies like mini-grid, nano-grid, and even in some cases, but also more importantly, strengthening the grid. And if we zoom out again on the number, that youthful population, we even have yet another big potential to unlock the value that will come in this chain, because it's not necessarily either or. It's about, just like what JP was mentioning, trying to leverage a combination of all the resources where it makes sense, cost effective. But two other things that we need to keep in mind beyond electrification is unlocking the full potential of digitization. And we've seen that for every watt that you invest in digitization, you have over 4 watts opportunity on energy efficiency.
Right.
And this is just coming on the backdrop of electrification, let alone other sectors that rely on this footprint. So to your point, we need to capitalize on the opportunity that all of this technology exists and create an ecosystem where we can bring it to the people that needs it the most in a way that is inclusive, powers productivity in those rural communities, and unlocks even a bigger potential beyond employment, but innovation, which the youths can bring to the table at scale.
Yeah. Mugwe, then one asks the question, Africa holds some of the world's greatest, talk about solar, wind, hydro and geothermal, yet renewable expansion remains relatively slow. So what are the biggest barriers that you would say are holding back large-scale investment and expansion into renewables in the continent?
One of the greatest challenges is access to capital. And then the second is cost of capital. When we look at studies looking at the cost of capital, doing a 50 megawatt wind project in Africa versus doing the same project in Germany costs about 30 to 40% more. Just because of the perceived risk of Africa, foreign exchange risk, and also the offtake risk within the continent. Now, this is very interesting because even though the technical capacity for energy is there, without the right infrastructure for finance and the right architecture for finance, it's going to be difficult to get them off the ground. And so looking at ways we could de-risk projects, be it at a utility scale level or a mini grid level, or even at a smaller level, is going to be very important. Working with also the local and domestic markets is going to be very critical, because domestic capital is going to play a major role in this energy revolution Africa is going to face. Not just getting money from abroad and the DFIs, but also getting money from pension funds, asset managers, banks that are local. The financial institutions in the continent need to also step up and play a leading role. And we are starting to see that. For example, in Kenya, you see KCB just got money from GCF to try and do climate finance and smart climate work with SMEs. These are the kinds of things and innovations we want to see in the financial space so that we can see the crowding in of finance going into these projects.
I still want to look at what many countries are in the continent are doing. So we look at Algeria, Egypt and Nigeria, who have built significant gas industries, right? But what lessons and opportunities can other countries in the continent draw from the experiences pretty much?
So you've mentioned the giants of gas in Africa. You know, first comes Algeria, then Egypt, then Nigeria. And they have different pathways and different histories and stories. Very, very interesting to me. For Nigeria, you've seen an underdevelopment in the gas sector, predominantly driven by the private sector. But again, when you look at the potential, Nigeria holds 33% of the natural gas reserves of Africa. Yet it is nowhere close to the production that it ought to be playing. So it really is playing below its belt when it comes to gas production. There's significant underinvestment in the sector. When you move over to Egypt, they're playing a very different strategy. They're coming in and saying, we are going to be a natural gas processing hub and export hub. They're importing gas through pipelines from Cyprus and Israel, and also using their own, and exporting that through ships into Europe. So they've used their geographical advantage to really position themselves as a gas exporting country, and also continuously doing exploration. Algeria has had another different pathway. You look at the development of Sonatrach, which is their largest oil and gas company. And that is a major that has been seen to develop a real institution and be led by the state. And so they have different pathways, but I think the underlying thread for all of them is that gas is a major source of energy for all these countries. And they're using it as part of what we call baseload for the countries. That can be fantastic for industrialization.
Mm-hmm. JP, let me get your thought on that, because at 42% cumulatively across the continent, the gas reserves, that's what I'm talking about there. What role should gas realistically play in Africa's energy mix?
The cardinal principle of gas is that if you don't pipe it or if you don't put infrastructure around it, you're going to flare it. So what you found out is that the role gas needs to play now is, apart from being a transition fuel, I think to a large extent within Africa, and the gentleman here has already called 3 main countries, we need to use gas as the pivot to say if we want clean energy, then it is gas. But then again, we also come to the question of capital. Every standard cubic feet of gas that is going to be deployed to generating power has to move from capex alone, where capital is only changing capex. But you must find a way of building infrastructure where capex and opex seem to be Siamese twins. That way you have models pay as you go, you're building a large capacity, but the financing or debt and equity combination is more local. And I say more local because of the stock exchanges we have in Africa. We must build products that can activate those gas finds, because there must be penalties where flaring it is not an option. Being able to catalytically move that gas from flaring fields to power generation, but also doing it in such a way that it is affordable in terms of the uptake of pay as you go. Gas becomes the trigger for, fossil fuels are not going to go away, and we need to be clear about that. But what it also means is that if you have a plethora of gas, Nigeria sits on 209 trillion scoff of gas. Wow. Policy decisions have changed. Now executive orders are enabling gas development in a way that they were not before. But most importantly for Africa, gas must become, and I'll use the word, the catalyst to power us out of darkness. And the capital, now we need to start looking more inward than outward to be able to solve these challenges.
Yep. If I just want to come to you briefly on the same red, and one then asks the question, we look at what gas is playing in the continent, and in terms of where we ought to go, because we know the old energy and the new technology, where are we? Are we doing it right?
The good news, and both speakers have alluded it very well, there's a lot of use cases around that we could learn from. And for me, if we look at it across the continent, whether it's from the north to the west, and even, by the way, here in the east, where there is a lot of activities ongoing, we need to get the best practice and see how we can look inwards to drive the scale. But I still want to come back to the other point, which is the fact that it shouldn't be either or. Okay. It's a combination of everything. We need to look at gas not as a destination, but as a transition. Again, financing is key. Blended financing to unlock the potential. And here, these comments both applies, by the way, even for renewable as much as it's for gas. And more importantly, unlock scale. These are factors that we need to capitalize. And for me, all of the things that we do, we need to keep in mind on the key resource that is the most important thing in Africa, and that's the people. How do you bring the right technology to the right place where people can unlock the productive opportunity that lies ahead? And this would always vary from country to country, region to region. But speed is also as critical.
Right. Bugwe, as we talk investment and infrastructure, the East African Rift System alone has huge potential for geothermal. It has untapped potential. What would it take to unlock that resource? Because we hear a lot about the risk factor here. Hence, it is the potential is largely untapped. What would it take?
So first and foremost, Kenya has been on the journey of geothermal for the last 60 years. It was actually even pre-independence is when they began looking at exploration. Geothermal systems require drilling, and drilling is high risk. You may hit steam, you may not hit steam. The other part of it is geothermal is geographically centered, so it doesn't appear everywhere. Now, because of that, we have seen different structures where the government takes the drilling risk. We have set up here in Kenya the Geothermal Development Corporation, GDC, that goes into fields, drills, gets data, and then allows the private sector to come and take it up and build power plants, etc. So these are the ways we can work together with public sector and private sector to de-risk and then also crowd in private sector capital at a time when the risk has been reduced to a point where private sector is comfortable with. I think it's also safe to say geothermal has tremendous potential. We in Kenya have only tapped about 3% of the geothermal potential. And so a lot of investment still needs to go into it, and it's going to be a team sport. It's not going to be one or the other. All have to be involved in the process.
Yeah, I want to bring in JP. JP, now Africa has world-class resources and huge solar potential now. One asks the question, as many of these high-yield zones are far from major industry centers, how important then is regional infrastructure and cross-border transmission in making renewables a reality and expansion viable?
Now, when you look at it, that Africa has the largest quote-unquote resources in terms of renewable energy. But the flip side is that when you look at the production capacity, so we're talking about battery energy storage systems, we're talking about solar panels, we're talking about inverters, we bring those things in. So two things need to happen, and they need to happen quickly. The ability to set up a company in Kenya and be able to trade into the EADC or West African countries, that's number one. Where is productive capacity? Where does it lie in terms of beneficiation? If you have the raw material in one African hub, then what needs to happen is that that productive capacity needs to begin to reside in Africa. Can we make our panels? Can we make batteries here? If you've got raw lithium and you're going to export it, then the truth of the matter is that there's no beneficiation in that process. Mm-hmm. We need to get to stages where the productive capacity of a block is of benefit to the whole continent. These are things that we need to accelerate. And the earlier we get things like this done, the better. Because if not, what you find out is that, which has been for over 50 years, we extract the raw material and then get the littlest value, or shall I say the smallest value, by importing it back. So, I mean, for Africa, distance is also key. And again, that's why I speak to the fact that we might not be able to do this on a central level, but look at it on a regional level. Because look at things like gas. The farther you're away from gas, mm-hmm. the more expensive it is to generate kilowatt per hour power. So these are things we need to look at. Again, centrally, no. But cross-border trades, cross-border model, and I'm hoping the AFCTA will help most of these initiatives. But again, the farther you're away from power and the resource, the more expensive it is per kilowatt hour.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, let's take a short break. And when we return, we continue our discussion on Africa's push towards energy diversification and what it will take to build a more resilient energy future. To stay with us.
And very well, welcome back to Talk Africa, co-produced with KTN. Let's continue with our discussion.
Ifeanyi, let me come to you here. Could renewable energy become Africa's biggest opportunity?
Absolutely, but not only, because most of the time when we think about renewable, we often focus just on the generation side. But I also want us to think broadly a little bit, just to complement all the right data that JP has shared and look at what I call balance of system. You have the mix on top, but you also have the distribution arm. And this part is one aspect that should be in our control, that we could even act even faster. Enable the grid to be more resilient to accommodate these different renewable energy sources, which, as we know, is also intermittent and requires a different control mechanism to increase the scale. And that's just one thing about unlocking the renewable. The second part is what opportunity does this present even for the wider industrialization agenda for the continent. For context, many people would have heard about the Mission 300, for example, which is a drive to see how to electrify 300 million people by 2030. Now, for the few countries that have come online, the compact, the initial data point is showing that we would need to be building at scale at least 600 mini-grids per month to be on track. Mm-hmm. And this is just for the few countries that have come on board. Imagine what that means for the broader audience. But this gives us an idea of the potential. What does it then mean for how can we take advantage of what is in front of us first to reduce, mm-hmm. and unlock the lost potential that already is on the network, what does it mean for what needs to be constructed, leveraging all the renewable energy sources depending on location, to build faster for the people for productive use, and then the last dimension, which is the industrialization potential. Today, in many countries, including here in Kenya, we are already assembling the electrical systems, which is what comes after the renewable source, that brings all of this technology together. Imagine if there is an orchestrated world policy that connects the opportunity in front of us, whether it's the electrification agenda, the grid agenda, to industrialization agenda. It means that the industrial base, which are again driven by SMEs and entrepreneurs that we continue to support and invest to assemble this, can have even predictability on the investments that they make, thereby again employing more people, having consistency in standards, in quality that can be applied to different applications.
Yeah. I want to bring in Mugwe. Mugwe, now Africa continues to export raw materials and importing finished green products. Now, what policies and incentives are needed to be put in place then to build solar panel manufacturing? You talk about battery for storage and a green industrial chain on the continent. What must we do?
So I think first and foremost is we have to look at the policies that we have on the continent and individually in each country. Are they going to be policies that are friendly to investors? Is my money going to be safe if I invest in the country? But you know, what is interesting is that Africa is actually going through a solar revolution. Believe it or not, by 2030, Africa will be producing more solar panels than South Korea. And South Korea right now is the 9th largest producer of solar panels. I think what we are going to see is a two-pronged approach. One is going to be a market where there's going to be a lot of assembly of solar panels. And those are countries that are going to have high demand for solar and for energy that is going to be mostly decentralized, but they don't have sufficient, cheap, affordable energy. And that's where the assembly comes in. I think on the other hand, you're going to have countries that take advantage of their depth and value of cheap, affordable, renewable energy, such as Ethiopia, who are now, right now, going into solar cell manufacturing that is very energy intensive. And so you're going to have this two horses or two scenarios where you're going to have the assembly and then you're going to have the solar cell manufacturing. And that is going to be beautiful because even matching that within Africa and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is part and parcel of what we're trying to achieve in terms of bringing home finished products and making finished products within the continent of Africa.
Right. So, JP, we're hearing about the financing gap. The potential is huge, but the financing is quite limiting. If you look at the reports, they're talking about Africa accounting for less than 3% of global clean energy funding, facing an estimated annual investment gap of about $60 billion to meet its 2030 renewable target. What needs to change, though? What needs to change to attract financing?
I think, and this is a very important question, and I've spoken about this a lot of time, that Africa needs to look inward. So when you look at the amount of money that Africa loses to graft, public procurement processes where things are inflated, and I'll use the word political suasion, you find out that so much money comes out of Africa, but does not go to productive use. So we must begin to build products. And when you look at things like the mutual funds, you look at things like the pension funds, we seem to have gotten it right in those aspects. So do we now need to begin to build financial products that are, and I'll use the word apart from bankable, that are securitized. So what do our stock exchanges need to do? Do they need to begin to do what you call green bonds internally? Because what it is that there's money that leaves Africa to go and invest in different parts of Europe and the rest of the world, but it goes by graft. So the first thing is to look internally. The second thing is that money that comes from donor agencies and everything has to follow the narrative of Africa. You hear things like, we will not invest in fossil fuels, and that's fine. But the truth of the matter is that when we had some energy crisis, you find out that these same countries went back to fossil fuel because they needed to solve an energy demand. So we must find ways to change the narrative of the capital that can come so that it broadens the base. technology needs to come into a lot of what we're doing now. So that, I mean, and when you find out things like there's an app for this, I can check my investments online. I can log on to an app. This is the quality and value of my investment. But most importantly, graft in terms of Africa, and I'd also say political situation, like I've said, needs to be checked in. The more money we can get from Africa becomes the show to the world that if we're doing this right, then so much more can come in.
And finally, gentlemen, one asks the question, if Africa gets diversification right over the next 2 decades, what should the continent's future realistically look like? And could Africa's build its energy resilience? I start with you, JP. Are we able to build our energy resilience?
The answer is an emphatic yes. Sadly, they say insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. So now we need to hone in. Africa knows what the problem is, and I think we've known for a while. So let's rein back and see. Is solar an advantage? Absolutely. Is wind an advantage? Absolutely. Is gas an advantage? Absolutely. If these 3 major things exist here, before we talk of geothermal, before we talk about hydro, if they exist, then what Africa needs to do is let's activate, let's find the capital more within than without, and let's start to execute projects. It's an absolute yes for me, and the time is now.
Yeah, Ifeanyi.
Absolute yes. And I want to leave us with a few more data points as well, because we're not just speaking as Africans being the future, it's actually the future of today. And there is a lot in front of us. When we look at the fact that 1 in 4 people in the next 25 years will be African, 1 in 3 of working population will be African, the real question is how quickly can we be not just on the receiving side, but also on the production side as well. Bringing together, these are not silos, bringing together the opportunity that exists with electrification, digitization, and industrialization working together in unison. The real good news is so many impressive use cases already exist in the continent. Technology has been de-risked. We have financial experts with us that gives us good ideas of what we can do. And there are lots of impact investment happening here, even in Kenya, but also across the continent. How can we bring all these best case and unlock the scale conversation?
Yeah, Mugwe.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with everything that has been said. The population density today is that of Asia in 1960. And therefore, one thing that we overlook is the importance of population density in development, because that's where you get the economies of scale, that's where you develop strong markets. And if we take and harness that, we will definitely get the development and demographic dividend that we have been speaking about. I think on a political level, it's also quite exciting. If you look at the African Union's Vision 2063, you also look at the Africa Single Electricity Market Vision, which is to build the largest single electricity market in the world by terms of the customers. That is going to be critical. So with putting all these things together, there is no reason why Africa should not see a bright future in terms of harnessing the energy, because we see energy as a development catalyst and development platform.
And thank you, gentlemen, for an insightful discussion. Africa's energy future will depend not on a single solution, but on how effectively the continent balances its vast natural resources, renewable potential, industrial ambitions, and development realities. The challenge now is whether Africa can build a more diversified and resilient energy systems shaped around its own priorities and long-term needs.
Well, that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa, co-produced with KTN. A big thank you to our guests, Mugwe Manga, Climate Finance Lead, FSD Kenya, Ifeanyi Odo, Country President, Schneider Electric East Africa, and Jide Pratt, Country Manager at Trade Green, joining us via Zoom from Lagos. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platform on Facebook and X, and you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. To join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall.
And I'm Dennis Aseto and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.